Hi everybody, welcome back to the podcast. It's Luke from Foot Tech. Today we are talking about the relative age effect and looking at early and late developers, early and late maturers. Really interesting subject and a good one for parents to listen to, because there might be some people listening to this that have got a child who's way more advanced physically than others, and equally maybe a late developer. And it's just going to give you some advice on what you can do to help your children in each circumstance, but also talking to coaches as well, grassroots managers, about what you can do to help your players in these situations, because it's important. It's important for development, and it's important for participation, keeping children happy, engaged, and in football fundamentally. So, relative age effect, what is it? In a nutshell, the relative age effect is this thing that states that kids born in the first 2 quarters of a year, so in the UK, we're talking about school year, so it'd be September to December, January to March. Those children that tend to be the ones that stand out, and tend to be the ones that are progressed further, whether that be academy or what have you. You've got your early and late maturers within that as well, so you're looking at kids who stand out because biologically they're further ahead than children that are in the same school year. We split that into 2 things. So you look at chronological age, which is the actual age of your child. So my daughter is 5 years old, that's her chronological age. But then you look at the biological age as well. So this is this is based on the average population's growth patterns, basically. So you might have a child that's 8, but biologically they might be older. So hopefully that makes sense. Few statistics for you before we get into it. A few years ago, there was an under-17 World Cup football. 42% of all the players playing in that tournament, not just England players, of all the players playing in that tournament in the World Cup, 42% were born in the first quarter of the year. 28% were born in the second quarter, 19% were born in the third quarter, and only 10% were born in the fourth quarter. Studies also show that there is a disproportionate amount of professional footballers in the Premier League who were born in quarter 1 than the other quarters. So there's clearly something happening. This has been going on for years. Now we're a football school. We're not a professional football club or anything like that. So we're going to talk probably a little bit more today about the grassroots side of things. But equally, if you're a parent listening to this that is wanting your child to go to a higher level, or indeed your child is at a higher level right now, you might just want to bear some of these points in mind, because it's going to be useful for you to understand. But we look at the whole approach, grassroots as well as the academy side of things. So why is this important? Okay, so let's look at it from the parent point of view. Good question to ask yourself is my child looking good and standing out on a football pitch because they are physically more developed than the other kids? Okay, take a step back and just look at that. Are they bigger, faster, stronger, whatever it might be, than all the other kids? And is that why they are standing out more? Is that why they've got this advantage over other children? Equally, is my child being left behind because they are playing against much more physically developed players, either with or against, or both? Are they less developed than the others? So therefore, are they getting left behind? Are they not standing out because simply they just can't compete? They're just not physically there to be able to compete. So we're going to talk about some of the dangers of this, some of the dangers of being an early maturer and certainly being a late maturer as well. And let's look at the early side of things. Some of the examples that we found is that if you've got a child who is much more physically developed than others, then they might stop trying because it's too easy. They're relying on attributes that are natural to them, as opposed to having to rely on skills. So they end up it just gets too easy for them. They can just simply kick the ball, run past them. They can kick the ball from the halfway line and score a goal. It's just too easy, and they stop trying, and therefore then that obviously impacts development. Some of them will drop out later because other kids catch up. So you might have kids that have a biological age that's a little bit older than their peers, but then all of a sudden those other kids will start to catch up, certainly as puberty hits and so forth. So if you've got a child that's an early developer, they all the time have won. They've not really had much of a challenge. They're just used to winning, not having to really try that hard. But then all of a sudden you've got these other kids that have had to try a bit harder, and they start catching up physically. Your child, that early developer, psychologically they just may decide that actually this isn't for me anymore. They're so used to winning, they might decide to drop out because they can't handle the fact that all of a sudden everyone is as good, if not better than them. So that is a big danger, and that can happen. An example of this, when we were at school, there was a lad that we played with from probably year 7 to year 9. Absolutely unbelievable. He was just bigger than us, faster than us, could kick a ball much harder than us. He probably could have got into a nightclub in town if he wanted. He was that sort of lad, beard and everything. And we thought he was brilliant. We thought he was absolutely brilliant. But then all of a sudden, year 9, year 10, year 11, he just started to see, actually, yeah, he's all right. But there were about 4 or 5 of them, 4 or 5 teammates of mine that were much better than him by then. They'd caught up physically, but they were also very good with a ball. Whereas our other friend, he'd not really had to rely on that. He'd relied on being faster, being stronger than everybody else, being able to kick a ball further and kick a ball harder. So that is a big thing. You could see something in him as well. He was actually, interestingly, in an academy, in a professional academy, and then was released just before college. So there's that as well, where all of a sudden you're caught up, and it's like, I've not really developed the football side, and now everyone else has caught up to me. And that's the next point as well. They rely on their physical attributes instead of developing the skills with the ball. So instead of developing football skill, it's just relying on that. It's just relying on kicking and running sometimes. It's relying on being able to blast the ball from miles away and still score because you can do that. They've not really had to develop much on the football side because they're just using the physical capabilities. You also find that there might be an early specialisation in terms of positions, which can be damaging. We've spoke about this before on the podcast about how kids need to play different positions. But if you've got a fast kid, a big kid, that's dominating, then I bet you can guess where that grassroots coach is going to be playing them. And if you've got a grassroots coach that's just hell-bent on winning all the time, that player is probably going to play up front, and they're going to score hundreds of goals, and that's all they're going to do. They're not going to experience other positions, because why would they? Why would that manager risk that? He knows that he's got his Haaland up his Haaland up front that's going to bang in all the goals and win all the games. So that child has only played up front or midfield, whatever it might be, never had a chance to play other positions and develop any game intelligence, develop any football skill based on being in other positions. And that can be damaging, massively damaging for the football development, as I say, like we spoke before. So these things altogether can really harm that early developers' progress and the early developers' improvement longer term. You've got your late developers, which is then sort of a 180 of this. So maybe a late developer or someone born in that Q3, Q4. You think about a child born in August. If they're playing football against a child that was born in the September before that September birth has had almost a year, if not a year, of extra development, physically, mentally, and everything, than that child born in August. So you can understand why this might be an issue. Now, don't get me wrong, there's probably lots of children as well that are born in August, but their biological age is further ahead, and therefore they've got some physical attributes that help them, and therefore, they're not. There's not too much of a gap there. But a lot of the time, you've got children that there's a year's difference, and this makes a difference whether it's schooling or any sport sometimes. So looking at those kids there, the late developers or the children born in the later quarters of the school year, you can understand why they might be at a disadvantage. So with the late developers, you're just looking at a 180 of what we've just said. You've got you've got them probably struggling to stand out, so therefore they might slip through the system a little bit. They might not be picked for the A team at grassroots level, or indeed get chances to progress to trials and stuff at academy teams and what have you. They might stop trying because it's too hard. They can't understand why. I'm pretty good with the ball, but I just can't get on the ball. I just keep getting tackled. They're just faster than me, they're bigger than me, they're stronger than me. So dropout rates might increase there. They might be put into a position early, and that early specialisation happens again. So he's little and he's quick. We'll just stick him out wide. She's fast, but she's small, so we'll just put her right back, whatever. So again, not having any opportunities to develop game knowledge, game skill by playing just one position all the time. They don't get a chance to explore other positions and learn the game properly. So all the things that we said about the early developers can happen to the late developers as well. What can happen with the late developers, and we had a great example of this at one of our Friday sessions years ago, was we had a boy come there, year 4, and all his friends also came. So we looked at him and thought, we can't really put him in that group because they were just he was tiny, he was so small for his age. And even his friends of average height, of an average biological age, they just towered over him. But he really wanted to be in that group. So from an enjoyment perspective, he wanted that. He was happy to do it, happy with the challenge. And what was really interesting, over a number of weeks we watched, and he started to develop his 1 and 2 touch football so much, because I guess in the back of his mind, psychologically, he was thinking, like, I'm not going to have a lot of time on the ball here. Or indeed he probably thought, I'm just going to get smashed to pieces when I get the ball. So his ability to play 1 touch or 2 touch was fantastic. His size became a constraint. We talk about constraints led football coaching and so forth. Like his size became a constraint, and his ability was fantastic to play that first time pass or what have you, which was great. So just because they're a late developer it's not a bad thing all the time. It's just then it comes a little bit more down to mentality and so forth. This boy certainly had a mentality that he wanted to be challenged with these bigger kids or what have you, but that doesn't always happen. And as I say, what can happen with late developers is they are overlooked by, like say, looking at the A teams in grassroots football, looking at maybe school football teams, certainly scouts, because if you stand back and watch a football match and you've just got these 1 or 2 kids dominating, who are you going to pick? It's that you need to know what you're talking about to understand, are they standing out because they were born in Q1 and are an early developer, or is it because of other reasons? Are they actually good at football? And this is the dangers of it, that a lot of children are getting picked. A lot of people listening to this know the let's get the big kids into these systems. It's been happening for years and years and years. It has got better, but it's still happening. So it's down to coaches, it's down to scouts, to understand, okay, this big kid on this pitch, he or she is dominating this game. Okay, let's really look. Are they doing it because of their football qualities, or are they doing it because of the physical qualities? What month of the year were they born in? And just collating this information to understand, okay, yeah, let's look at this player in a bit more detail. Actually, let's keep an eye, let's just see over a number of months or whatever. Are they just using the physical side of things? And look, and don't get me wrong, just because you have these physical advantages, that's certainly not a bad thing. If you are big, fast, strong, and you can play football, brilliant. Jude Bellingham, he can do a lot, and he's physically a specimen. So we're not saying it's a bad thing. What we're saying is that if a child is relying on those physical capabilities and not developing the football side, that's the problem when it comes to football. That's the issue there. So what can we do? What can we do as parents? What can we do as coaches? Which we'll get onto in a second. So for parents, let's say, for example, you've got a early developer. Okay, you've recognised that. It's now about finding the right environment with the right challenge. Okay, it needs to be a child-centred approach. So your player may love playing in this team that they're in. They're dominating, but they love it. They're with their friends and so forth. So we have to bear that in mind. Okay, we can't just pull them out of that because you want to improve their football and you're not really thinking about anything else. Enjoyment is paramount. Okay, but can you find something else? So if it's a case of they want to stay in that team, fine. But can we find something else for them? Whether that's a football session elsewhere, whether that's a second team maybe. Can you join another team that plays on a different day? Can you do anything just to give them that challenge somewhere else? Okay, you could almost look at it as like that's the one that they're in at the minute is like the fun stuff. They love it. It's with the friends and blah blah blah, the more social side. But then the other stuff is like, okay, yeah, loving it, but this is their development. This is their challenge. So can we find something else for them like that? And you need to involve your child in this as well. Get them to understand that it's a good thing. We're doing it to help them improve. Every kid wants to improve. So it's looking at that and talking to them about it, involving them in the decisions. If that's harder, or you can't do it, then can we challenge them a little bit more? Can we push them out of the comfort zone a little bit by giving them challenges? So maybe you start rewarding things like passing, maybe you start rewarding things like assists, whatever it might be, stuff away from just being able to run past players or whatever. Can you reward that? So then they just start to develop some of their football skills a little bit more. That's a hard thing. It's quite a generic statement to make, but it's thinking about things away from dominating just because of the physical attributes. Can we reward them for other things that are more football specific, really, and get them doing some of the things that we want them to do? Age groups. So this is a tricky one because I think somewhere along the line there are parents that say that children can play up, and then there are some that say they've asked and they can't. So I think this is about speaking to your grassroots team. It's about speaking to the league as well. If you've got a kid that is absolutely dominating because of size, because of physical attributes and whatever, it may be time to look at, can we move them up an age group? Okay, again, needs to be a child-centred approach. It's not just doing it because, it's doing it for the right reasons and making sure they're happy with this. So can we find a different age group? And maybe that's a start of, maybe make it a little bit of an easier transition. So maybe look for an older age group, but maybe a B team or a C team, perhaps, if you've got a club that sets things up like that. So they're not just thrown into the highest level of Division 1 straight away in the older age group. Maybe it's a slower transition, playing with chronologically older kids, but maybe on the ability level they're not a million miles away, if that makes sense. So looking at things like that, but you'd have to speak to the league, you'd have to speak to the club about that, because I think the rules are there's a few grey areas there. My personal opinion is I think it should be allowed, and I think kids should be allowed to go the other way as well. So if you've got a late developer born in Q4, Q3 maybe, I think they should be able to go the other way. To be honest, I'd open that up to the entire year group. I think it needs to be a case by case. That would be so hard to manage, which is probably why it doesn't happen. But we teach PE in schools, in primary schools, and we work with schools that combine year groups, year 3, 4, year 5, 6. They're playing PE together, which will involve contact sport, basketball, football, rugby, so forth. So if it's all right in schools, then why should it not be all right in extracurricular activities and grassroots sport? So I think some of the issues around it would be that you'd end up getting those grassroots managers that are just focused on winning. You'd end up getting them, picking kids from an older age group to drop down to them and all that sort of nonsense that we know goes on. So that's possibly why. But in terms of my opinion, I think a child should be allowed to play up an age group or below, an age group below, if it's going to help their development and increase their participation, keep them in football longer, and everybody's happy. It's not going to be to the detriment of the other children involved. Then it should happen. The focus should be that. But that's just my opinion. It's an idea for you, certainly. Age group stuff, just talking to the clubs and so forth. If you've got on that point, if you listen to this with a player in an academy system, then again that might be something for you to think about. If you've got somebody that's a late maturer, late developer, could you find them some training elsewhere? And that's the other point for grassroots as well, is can you find them some training elsewhere if needs be? If you can't find a team, can't find matches or whatever, can you find them training somewhere else where they can be put more on an ability level, as opposed to worrying too much about the age sort of thing? That's certainly something that we do at FootTech, is we look at we start with age and then we look at ability, okay, and we move them based on that, and it's worked. We've got so much evidence of this working. So coaches, it's now for you to think about, is my team winning because of the football, or because you've got 2 or 3 players that are just physically dominating everybody else, or indeed a team of players who are just physically dominating everybody else? Then the question is, what can I do to develop each player based on their needs? Okay, so if you've got the physically dominating players, then can we rotate positions? Can we make sure they're experiencing different positions, giving them a bit of a different football challenge? Could we maybe add some constraints at training? That's probably a podcast in itself, but can you give them things at training which maybe challenge them more on the football side as opposed to the physical side? Okay, so whatever that might look like for your player, can you just give them little challenges at training that just maybe test that football side more than just relying on those physical attributes? Not easily done. I think if you listen to this, you need some ideas on that, drop us a message, because as I say, I could go off on a tangent for hours talking about those sorts of things. And then involve the parents, because if you're doing all these things, the parents don't know why, that's obviously going to cause some issues. So involve the parents and explain to them, look, your child is head and shoulders above everybody else, but a lot of that is coming down to the fact that they're bigger, faster, stronger. So I need to make sure that I'm developing them, and here's how I'm going to do that. I'm going to help them develop the football side. Here's how I'm going to do that. We're going to rotate positions. I'm going to give them some challenges at training and so forth. But certainly involving those parents is massive. And then the other thing, and on the flip side to that, with the later developers, it's looking at that. It's speaking to the parents to say, look, he or she's in this team. There's a few players that are way ahead physically. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to help them by putting them in different positions. I'm going to constrain some of the more physically advanced players at training so they can get on the ball a little bit more. Whatever, but just talk to them, because if you open those lines of communication, it shows you care, and you'll get the parents on side, and together you can work through this. There is a few examples. I'm sorry, and I think the last point on that is, we get it. You want your team to win. We want kids to want to win football matches. They need to want to win football matches, because otherwise it stops being a sport. So we get that you shouldn't just because you've got 2 or 3 players that are more physically advanced, that you should just start restricting them, I guess, because that's also not fair to them. They want to use their physical attributes to the best of their abilities, and they should be allowed to do that. It's just understanding the balance. It's making sure that they're still developing on the football side, and you're helping them do that. Of course, win games, try to win games, but you don't need to worry about making that the focus. The kids make that the focus. The kids want to win games. The kids get upset after a match or celebrate after a match. If you start making it all about the score, then it just becomes a different environment that you don't need. Kids take care of that competitive side. We don't need to be screaming and shouting on the sidelines and shouting them after a loss or whatever. Psychologically they sort that out. They make it competitive. We don't need to add to that. We don't need to add to any importance on that side of things. We just need to focus on their development and enjoyment. Hopefully that makes sense. Few examples of how this is sort of real life examples, I guess, of how some people have tried to sort this out. So Jesse Lingard, ex-Man United, an England international, he was at Man United for a lot of years, and his development physically was way behind for his age group compared to his peers. And Alex Ferguson actually spoke about the fact that they held him back. So he was playing with, I think it was 2 years below himself. So you can imagine that for a teenage boy to be told you're going to drop 2 years back to play in these teams. that must have been psychologically a bit of a blow for him, because you know what it's like being a teenager. But it worked. It was so slight that if he'd have played of his older age, he probably wouldn't have developed as much. But because they allowed him that to drop back, he did develop. And then, he's obviously not in spotlight as much anymore now, but he played for Manchester United and he went to a World Cup with England. So, there's certainly evidence to suggest that if it's managed correctly, I do think at that higher level, if you're a smaller player, you need to have an unbelievable amount of talent. I think the odds are still stacked against the smaller player, unfortunately. Again, changed over the last few years, or changing, but still, it's still a tough one. But these are just examples of the ways that it can be managed. If you've got a player with a lot of talent, it can be done. There's also some examples of Belgium. So one of the books I was reading from the Croatian FA, they were talking about Belgium and how a few years ago they looked at having almost 2 national teams at their younger age group. So there was a team of the biological age was all similar, whether that be higher or lower, and they played the lower age played against teams of lesser ability than the other squad, and actually the players that made it and were playing professional football from that team was more than the biologically older age groups, because they'd been managed a little bit better. So that was a really interesting one. And Southampton as well, I remember reading about this a few years ago, they were looking at tournaments and things like that where the focus was biological age as opposed to kids born in the early developers, should I say, and looking at how they can help children. It's such a tough, complex thing. It's very much case by case basis and not a one size fits all approach. It is so hard. I don't know if there'll ever be an answer to it, but we're concerned about kids playing football, enjoying football, and staying in football at any level. And hopefully today, some parents listening to this, you can just help your child based on what we've said. If you've got a late developer, get your arm around them. Can you find them some extra training somewhere else in the right sort of environment and the right ability level for them, so it does develop their football a little bit more so they can catch up? And equally, if you've got a child that's an early developer, what can you do to make sure they are developing psychologically? They've still got the hunger to improve. It's not becoming too easy for them, because it's tough. Especially there'll be some people listening to this that have got children at a really high level in academies and things like that. But it's taking that step back and thinking, are they going to get caught up? What do I need to do to help? Because are they just relying on their speed, their height, whatever it might be, their strength? What do I need to do to help them? But as I say, equally that applies to grassroots as well. Think about the child. It's just making sure they are happy. Make sure they're happy, they're enjoying it, and they're developing. You may just need to involve them a little bit more so they understand it. Hopefully that makes sense. Like I say, an interesting area. If you get on the computer and have a look at some statistics around all this, it is quite interesting and eye-opening as well. Hopefully, there'll be some answers in the next few years as to the best way to manage it. But in the meantime, I hope that's been of use. As we always say, drop us a message if you need any extra details, and we'll be happy to help. Thanks for listening.